Imagine holding knowledge, like right in your hand, literally etched into mud.
Hmm.
That's basically what the earliest libraries looked like, these 5,000-year-old clay tablets from Mesopotamia.
It's incredible, isn't it?
It really makes you think about how fundamental, how deep our need to preserve and share information actually is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That drive, to record things, keep them safe, and then pass that understanding along.
Yeah.
It's a thread that just runs through all of human history and the story of libraries. Well, that is the story of that drive.
And that's exactly what we're plunging into today. Forget dry historical lists. This is a real deep dive into the fascinating evolution of libraries.
Yeah, how they started, how they changed.
Their surprising origins, their incredible transformations over millennia, and their enduring importance in shaping, well, everything.
It's a huge story.
It is, and we've sifted through a whole load of sources: ancient writings, modern library science perspectives, history articles, documents on public access.
With your works.
To bring you the most compelling milestones and those moments that make you go, wow, I didn't know that.
And our goal, really, is to navigate this vast timeline with you, our listener.
Yeah.
We want to pinpoint the crucial developments, reveal why they mattered, without, making it feel overwhelming.
Think of this as your curated journey. A shortcut through library history, hitting the highlights and the surprising facts you'll find genuinely interesting.
Ready to start way back.
Okay, let's get right to those mud-etched beginnings then. Mesopotamia, those ancient clay tablets. Tell us about how it all kicked off.
Right. Mesopotamia, the area we now know as parts of Iraq, Syria, Turkey, that's where the earliest known libraries have been found. We're talking over 5,000 years ago.
5,000?
Yeah. The Sumerians were already using this wedge-shaped script, cuneiform, pressing it into wet clay tablets. They recorded everything: farm transactions, laws, myths, you name it.
And they had actual collections of these.
Oh, yes. Big ones. Like at Nippur, they found a collection, maybe a library, with an estimated 30,000 tablets.
30,000 clay tablets. You can almost feel the weight of that. And then there's Ashurbanipal's library at Nineveh that takes it up another notch, doesn't it?
It really does. Found in the 19th century, this library from the 7th century BCE, created by the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal for his royal contemplation.
Right.
It held around 30,000 cuneiform tablets. And what's amazing is the range of stuff. Not just admin records or religious texts,
Yes.
scholarly works, astronomy, medicine, and literature, including the famous Epic of Gilgamesh, which is itself like 4,000 years old.
So these weren't just dusty archives. They were actively collecting, curating a whole spectrum of human thought and creativity. Ashurbanipal sounds like a serious collector, though I gather his methods involved a fair bit of, well, let's say forceful acquisition.
Yes, that's a significant point. His methods, collecting texts from conquered lands, might not align with modern ethics. But his ambition, you could say, inadvertently preserved an extraordinary amount of ancient knowledge.
A kind of ruthless preservationist.
You could see it that way. And despite how he got them, there's evidence he really valued the collection. Some tablets have inscriptions warning of, like, divine punishment for anyone who dared steal or damage them.
Seriously, what did they say?
Things like threatening to obliterate their name, their descendants, the whole lineage. It speaks volumes about how important they saw these records.
Wow, an ancient library security system with divine wrath. Okay, so let's shift south a bit to ancient Egypt. They weren't lugging clay around, were they? Papyrus was their thing.
Exactly. The Egyptians were ingenious with the Nile reeds. They processed them into sheets to make papyrus their main writing surface, and they'd join these sheets up.
To make scrolls.
Very long scrolls. The Harry's Papyrus 1, which is now in the British Library, is an incredible 133 feet long.
133 feet. Imagine trying to find a specific bit of text on that. Makes you appreciate modern books.
Definitely highlights the ingenuity and maybe the patience needed back then. Papyrus became the go-to writing material across the Mediterranean around 500 BCE, and it stayed that way for centuries.
Until about 300 AD.
Around then, yeah, though Egyptians used it even longer. So the great libraries we hear about in Egypt, Rome, Greece, they were mostly these vast collections of papyrus scrolls.
And we even have accounts like Aulus Gellius talking about the Athenian tyrant Pisistratus in the 6th century BCE.
Right, establishing a big papyrus collection.
And opening it to the public. Some historians actually credit him with the first government-owned library. That feels like a real turning point for access.
It's a crucial step, yeah. Shows that even way back then, the idea of making knowledge available beyond just a tiny elite was starting to bubble up. Now that brings us to what many consider the absolute pinnacle of ancient libraries.
Alexandria.
The legendary Library of Alexandria. Its reputation as the intellectual heart of the ancient world. It's just unparalleled.
Absolutely. Founded in Egypt by Ptolemy Isoter, right after Alexander the Great died around 323 BCE, it quickly became the intellectual hotspot. We don't know exactly what it looked like, but the estimates.
They're staggering. Maybe over 500,000 papyrus scrolls at its peak.
500,000. Covering everything. Literature, history, law, math, science. Just an incredible breadth.
And it wasn't just a storage place, remember. It was a buzzing research institute. It pulled in the brightest minds from all over the Mediterranean.
Like who?
Scholars like Strabo, Euclid, Archimedes. They lived and worked there, funded by the government, basically, researching, copying texts meticulously. It was a unique ecosystem for knowledge.
But the story of Alexandria is also tangled up with loss, isn't it? The classic story blames Julius Caesar's fire in 48 BCE for destroying it.
That's the dramatic version?
Yeah.
Probably not the whole picture, though. Most historians now think the library, or at least parts of it, survived for several more centuries.
So Caesar's fire wasn't the end.
It likely caused major damage in the harbor area, possibly to warehouses storing scrolls, but maybe not the main library itself. There's evidence it continued functioning, maybe smaller scale. Its final end might have become much later potential destruction in 270 AD, or maybe even in the 4th century. It's still debated.
So more of a gradual decline, perhaps, than one single catastrophe. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, that keeping knowledge safe has always been a fragile business.
Very fragile.
Yeah.
And Alexandria wasn't the only big player, you know. Over in what's now Turkey, Pergamum also had a major library.
Right, the Library of Pergamum, established in the 3rd century BCE by the Attalid dynasty.
Another formidable collection. Around 200,000 scrolls housed in a temple complex dedicated to Athena. They think it had like 4 rooms, 3 for scrolls, 1 for meetings.
And what's this about a rivalry with Alexandria?
Oh yeah, there was intense competition. A real knowledge arms race to build the most complete collections. It even led to rival schools of thought, different ways of interpreting texts.
A library rivalry. You don't often hear about that. What drove it? Just bragging rights?
Prestige, partly, for sure. Having the biggest library meant huge influence. But there's a great story, maybe legend, maybe not told by Pliny the Elder.
Go on.
He said the rulers in Egypt got so worried about Pergamum catching up, they actually stopped exporting papyrus to them.
No way. Just to stifle the competition.
That's the story. And ironically, this might have pushed Pergamum to become a major fenner for making parchment writing material from animal skins, which turned out to be more durable than papyrus anyway.
So a trade war accidentally spurred innovation in information tech. That's fantastic. Okay, so we've had these huge state libraries. What about something more personal, like the Villa of the Papyri?
Yeah.
Sounds like a time capsule.
It basically is. The Villa of the Papyri in Herculaneum gives us this unique window into a private Roman library. Not as massive as Alexandria, sure, but it's a collection of about 1,800 scrolls.
Is the only one from antiquity that survived intact.
Exactly. Thanks to Mount Vesuvius erupting in 79 AD. The villa, which might have belonged to Julius Caesar's father-in-law, got buried under nearly 90 feet of volcanic ash and rock.
And that preserved the scrolls.
In a way, yes. Carbonized them, but preserved their shape. They weren't rediscovered until the 1700s.
And reading them must be incredibly difficult, like trying to read charcoal.
It's painstaking work, highly delicate. They use advanced tech now, like multispectral imaging, X-rays, trying to digitally unroll them and see the text inside these brittle, charred lumps.
Have they deciphered much?
Some, yes. They've found text by an Epicurean philosopher named Philodemus. It's slow progress, but it gives us this direct, if challenging, link to the intellectual life of the Roman elite.
Like hearing whispers from the past. Okay, back to more public setups. The libraries of Trajan's Forum in Rome. They sound impressive, really integrated into the city.
Very much so. Built by Emperor Trajan around 112 AD, and it wasn't just one building, it was 2 separate structures.
For different languages.
Yeah, one for Latin works, one for Greek. Situated on opposite sides of a grand portico with Trajan's column right there in the middle, it was part of this huge public complex showing how central knowledge was becoming in Roman society.
A bilingual library complex in the 2nd century. Pretty sophisticated. What were they like inside?
Elegantly built concrete, marble, granite. Each had a big central reading room, and then 2 levels of alcoves with bookshelves. They estimate maybe 20,000 scrolls between them.
And they lasted a while.
We know they were still around in the 5th century AD, so they were a major public resource in the heart of Rome for at least 300 years.
So definitely not just for scholars.
Yeah.
Integrated into public life, it's fascinating seeing this theme emerge again and again, this push for broader access. Now, the Library of Celsus in Ephesus, well, that one has a really striking personal story attached, doesn't it?
It really does. Finished around 120 AD, it was built as a memorial to a Roman consul, Tiberius Julius Celsus Polemanus.
By his son, I think?
Yes. And its facade is stunning even today in Turkey. Marble stairs, columns, statues representing wisdom, virtue, intelligence, knowledge. It's beautiful.
And inside?
A main rectangular hall with niches in the walls for bookcases, probably holding around 12,000 scrolls. But the truly unique thing
Is Celsus himself.
exactly. He was actually buried inside the library in this ornate sarcophagus right beneath the main reading room.
Buried within the knowledge he loved. What a powerful statement about the connection people felt to these collections. Okay, as we move out on classical antiquity into the Middle Ages, the role of libraries seems to shift, especially in the West. More about preservation during turbulent times.
Precisely. As the Western Roman Empire declined, the focus shifted eastward. The Imperial Library of Constantinople in the Byzantine Empire became absolutely vital for safeguarding classical learning.
When was that founded?
Started in the 4th century AD under Constantine the Great, and it grew significantly. By the 5th century, it reportedly held around 120,000 scrolls and, importantly, codices.
Codices like early books with pages.
Exactly. The shift from the awkward scroll to the much more user-friendly codex format was happening, and that was a huge development in book history itself.
120,000 items in the 5th century is massive. But you mentioned its fortunes weren't always stable. Neglect, fires.
Yes, its history had ups and downs. It suffered periods of decline and took a massive hit during the sack of Constantinople in 1204 by Crusaders. A devastating blow.
But it still played a crucial role in preservation.
Immensely crucial. We owe a huge debt to the scribes and scholars there. They painstakingly copied deteriorating papyrus scrolls onto more durable parchment codices. Without them, countless masterpieces of Greek and Roman literature would simply be lost to us. They were the quiet heroes of intellectual continuity.
Absolutely vital work. And around the same sort of era, but further east, another legendary place springs up, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad.
Ah, the House of Wisdom. Established early in the 9th century AD during the Abbasid Caliphate, it was just a remarkable explosion of intellectual and cultural activity.
Centered around a library.
At its heart, yes.
Yeah.
A huge library packed with manuscripts not just from the Islamic world, but also Persia, India, Greece, covering this dazzling range of subjects: math, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, science.
An incredible melting pot of knowledge traditions. And it drew in the top scholars of the day, right?
It really did. Leading intellectuals came from all over. They studied translated texts into Arabic, built upon this vast foundation. Thinkers like Al-Khwarizmi.
The father of algebra.
That's him. And Al-Kindi, the great polymath, the philosopher of the Arabs. It was the intellectual engine of the Islamic Golden Age for centuries.
But like so many others, its story ends tragically. The Mongol invasion, the sack of Baghdad in 1258.
Yes. The story goes that so many books were thrown into the Tigris River that the water turned black with ink.
What a devastating image. An unimaginable loss.
It really symbolizes that massive intellectual setback. Now, if we jump forward quite a few centuries, we start seeing things in Europe that feel a bit more like the direct ancestors of our modern public libraries.
Right, this gradual appearance of town libraries, maybe 15th to 19th centuries, England, Scotland, France, Germany. But they weren't quite public in the way we think of them now, were they?
Not exactly. They offered some public access, but often started from, say, a wealthy individual's gift, or maybe joint contributions. Then they'd be entrusted to the local church or town council. Places like Norwich, Leicester, Bristol, and England in the early 17th century. But the problem was often sustainability. Funding might dry up, management wasn't consistent, and sadly, many fell into neglect.
Any exceptions?
Chetham's Library in Manchester is a great example. Founded in 1653 from a private endowment, and it's still going strong today. That individual backing made a difference.
So a mix of good intentions and civic pride, but often lacking that reliable structure. What about continental Europe?
Similar patterns. Caen in France had a library from the 15th century, later restored, opened to the public properly in 1809. Lyons had one from 1503 that grew significantly. Germany saw early town libraries too: Ratisbon, Ulm, Hamburg, starting in the 15th and 16th centuries. Slow steps towards broader access.
It's fascinatingly slow burn, this evolution towards everyone getting access. Now, the real explosion of the modern public library seems to be the 19th and 20th centuries. The UK and the US were key players here. Let's start with the UK.
The UK was definitely a pioneer in setting up proper public library systems. But even before the big laws, there was important groundwork. People like Reverend Thomas Bray setting up parish libraries.
For clergy and parishioners.
Yes. And in Scotland, Reverend James Kirkwood had this idea for a whole network of parish libraries. And then, early 19th century, Reverend Samuel Brown had his traveling libraries in East Lothian.
Traveling libraries, like an early bookmobile.
Essentially, yeah. Circulating book boxes to villages. Really forward-thinking for the time, getting books out to rural areas.
Amazing individual efforts paving the way. But the big legislative shift was the Museum Act of 1845, and then especially the Public Libraries Act of 1850.
Exactly. The 1845 Act let towns tax locally for museums, which sometimes included libraries. But 1850 was the watershed. It allowed towns over 10,000 people to levy a specific half-penny rate.
Just a small tax.
Tiny. And it was specifically for land and buildings. Here's the catch, though. Initially, that money couldn't be used to buy books.
Wait, what? You could build the library but not fill it? That seems bizarre.
It does seem counterintuitive now. The focus was purely on the physical space first. Thankfully, they realized pretty quickly this is a problem.
So they fixed it.
Yes, amending acts in 1853 and 1855 extended the rules to Ireland and Scotland and, crucially, allowed the rates to be used for buying books and other materials. Manchester was one of the first cities to really run with it.
And then, of course, you can't talk UK libraries without mentioning Carnegie.
Andrew Carnegie, absolutely transformative. His philanthropy funded the construction of over 380 public library buildings across the UK. Just immense.
His name is practically synonymous with libraries. And then later, the Act of 1919 removed those limits on the tax rate and gave library powers to counties, too.
Right. That really paved the way for the comprehensive free public library service covering the whole country that developed through the 20th century.
Okay, let's cross the Atlantic. How did things unfold in the United States? Similar path.
Similar, but with its own flavor. Early on, you had organized book collections in cities like Boston, Philadelphia, New York. Peterborough, New Hampshire often gets cited as the oldest free public library from 1833.
Older than Boston's.
Slightly, yeah. Boston Public Library opened in 1852, considered the second publicly supported municipal library. But before that, you had the really influential social library movement.
That was Benjamin Franklin's thing, right?
Kicked off by Franklin, yes, with the Library Company of Philadelphia in 1731. These were subscription libraries. You paid a fee to be a member and borrow books. An important step towards wider access, even if it wasn't totally free yet.
So a step beyond purely private collections. Are any of those early U.S. libraries still around?
Oh, yes. The Redwood Library in Newport, the New York Society Library, Charleston Library Society, they're still going. And there are claims for the first free children's library in Arlington, Massachusetts, way back in 1835.
Children's libraries that early. And there were other types, too.
You know, mercantile libraries for business people, YMCA libraries, lots of different models popping up, and early philanthropists like Caleb Bingham donating specifically for kids reading in Connecticut.
It sounds like a real patchwork quilt of initiatives. When did the idea of proper tax support for public libraries really take hold in the U.S.?
There were early attempts, like in New York State in 1835, trying tax support for school district libraries. But the Boston Public Library's establishment in 1854 is seen as a really key moment for the modern public library model.
Driven by people like George Ticknor and the mayor.
Exactly. Visionary people pushing for it. Though interestingly, even then, there were initial rules about who could actually take books out of the library. It wasn't instantly borrow anything you want.
Always these gradual steps. And then, just like in the UK, Carnegie.
Andrew Carnegie again. His impact in the U.S. was even bigger, arguably. Funded over 2,800 free public library buildings across the country. Just staggering generosity that fundamentally shaped America's library landscape.
Unbelievable. And as these libraries grew, you got professional groups forming.
Right. The American Library Association, the Public Library Association, they emerged to set standards, share best practices, advocate for libraries, and later, federal laws like the Library Services Act helped push library access into underserved rural areas.
It really shows this enduring belief in the value of public libraries, even though, as you know, many face tough budget situations today.
Absolutely. It highlights that constant need for public support and advocacy. Now, just briefly touching elsewhere. France's National Library has roots way back in 1368, and they had early public library advocates too.
And Italy.
Italy has the Malatestiana Library in Cesena from 1452, often called the first European civic library open to everyone. And Poland had the Zosiewski Library in the mid-18th century, another very early public access library in Europe.
It's just amazing seeing these parallel stories unfold across the globe, all driven by that same fundamental desire to learn and share knowledge. Now, we absolutely have to talk about India, which has its own incredibly rich and ancient library history.
Indeed, it stretches back centuries before the 1600s. You had major collections supported by kings and emperors at famous ancient learning centers like Nalanda, Vikramshila, Taxila.
But mainly for scholars, right? Not the general public.
Generally, yes. These were elite centers of learning. The Mughal rulers also established significant private libraries.
So when does the idea of broader access start appearing in India?
Well, from the 16th to 19th centuries, you see continued patronage from figures like Maharaja Suwayman Singh of Jaipur, Maharaja Ranjit Singh of Punjab. The Saraswati Mahal Library in Tanjore from the 17th century is still a remarkable place, but access was usually restricted.
Then printing and European influence start changing things.
Exactly. In the 17th and 18th centuries, you see libraries linked to European presence, like at Fort St. George in Madras, the East India Company's library in Calcutta. Circulating libraries pop up. A key legal step was the Delivery and Registration of Publications Act in Bombay in 1808, starting to formally track published works.
And early public libraries start appearing.
Yes, in cities like Bombay, Calcutta, Madras, often initially funded mainly by Europeans. But a really pivotal moment was the founding of a public library in Calcutta in 1835.
What was special about that one?
It was explicitly stated to be open to everyone, regardless of background. That library eventually became the National Library of India, a truly huge step.
And there was another key one in Madras.
Connemara Public Library opened 1896, often considered the first true public library in India, needing only a small refundable deposit to join. Also, the Press and Registration of Books Act of 1867 was important for building collections systematically.
Okay, so moving into the 20th century, before India's independence.
The Imperial Library was formally set up in Calcutta in 1891. That's the one that became the National Library. You had figures like Maharaja Sayajirao Gaikwad III of Baroda making huge contributions to public library development in his state. Really visionary work.
And the library movement itself starts organizing?
Yes. Library associations formed in places like Andhra Pradesh, Punjab, then an All-India Association. And crucially, this is the era of S.R. Ranganathan.
The father of library science in India.
Widely considered so, yes. His contributions were immense. Then, after independence in 1947, the Imperial Library officially becomes the National Library of India in 1948.
And other developments.
The Delhi Public Library was set up as a model project. The Delivery of Books and Newspapers Act in 1954 helped ensure the National Library received copies of publications. An advisory committee for libraries in 1958 recommended a whole national system, though fully implementing that has been complex.
And foundations to support libraries.
The Raja Ramohan Roy Library Foundation, RRLF, established in 1972, has been hugely important in promoting library services across India. There have been national policies, 5-year plans. It's a continuous process of development.
That's such a rich history, and you even mentioned Karnataka specifically, with early royal support, then the formal Department of Public Libraries set up in 1966 after their own act. It just reinforces that this drive for libraries is universal. Okay, now we have to shift gears quite dramatically into the digital age. Libraries started grappling with electronics around 1980.
Yes, the 80s were a real turning point. Libraries started thinking seriously about their role in an electronic society. The first big step for many was developing online public access catalogs, OPACs.
Replacing the old card catalogs?
Exactly. Suddenly, you could search the library's holdings electronically. It was revolutionary for users and also opened the door to sharing resources between libraries much more easily. Access expanded beyond the physical walls.
And terms like virtual library started appearing.
Yes, often used interchangeably with digital library at first. Now, virtual often means a library providing access mainly to distributed digital resources, things held elsewhere. A key distinction also emerged between stuff born digital.
Like a website or an e-journal.
And stuff that was digitized from a physical format, like scanning an old book. And most libraries today operate as hybrid libraries, managing both physical and digital collections side by side.
So the physical book wasn't going away, but this whole new digital dimension was opening up, and national libraries had to adapt too, right? extending legal deposit laws to cover electronic stuff.
Absolutely. And new systems were needed to manage and preserve all this digital material. For archives, things like the Encoded Archival Description, EAD, developed an XML format to standardize descriptions so archives worldwide could be searched online.
And specialized digital libraries, too.
Yeah, things like CAD libraries for 3D engineering models, repositories for 2D graphics, the advantages were clear. Much wider accessibility, powerful search capabilities, sharing resources easily across distances.
But it created new challenges, managing all this digital stuff.
Huge challenges. Creating the right metadata, the descriptive information for digital items is complex. How do you search across lots of different digital libraries effectively? That led to strategies like distributed searching or harvesting metadata into central indexes.
And keeping the digital stuff accessible long-term, preservation must be a nightmare.
Digital preservation is a massive, ongoing headache. You've got techniques like emulation, running old software in new environments, bitstream preservation to ensure the file itself doesn't degrade, or migration, constantly moving data to newer formats before the old ones become obsolete. It's complex and expensive.
And then there's copyright. That must be even trickier online.
Oh, incredibly tricky. Fair use, digital rights management, what libraries are allowed to do with ebooks. Publishers often put tight restrictions on lending. Legislation like the Digital Millennium Copyright Act in the U.S. adds another layer. It's a constant negotiation.
And helping people find things in these vast digital collections.
Recommendation systems, like you see on shopping sites, are increasingly used to suggest relevant resources based on what users have looked at before.
So tons of advantages, but also drawbacks. Things like the digital divide, not everyone has equal access, the cost of maintaining it all, designing user-friendly interfaces.
Definitely. But the overall trend is clear. More and more digitization, aiming towards this vision of, almost universal access to recorded knowledge. We even see digital archives popping up for specific events, like documenting the COVID-19 pandemic in real time. Shows how adaptable libraries are.
It really does. Large-scale projects continue, the potential is huge, but as library folks always emphasize, making sure this digital information actually lasts and stays accessible, that's the critical challenge ahead.
Couldn't agree more.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into library history, a few things really stand out to me. First, just the sheer longevity of the idea. Libraries adapting and evolving for over 5,000 years. It's incredible.
It really is. That fundamental need persists.
Second, the constant innovation. How we record and share knowledge has changed dramatically. Clay, papyrus, parchment, print, digital. But the goal remains similar.
Adaptation has been key to survival.
And third, that persistent, often difficult but undeniable progress towards wider, more equitable access to information. It wasn't always easy, but the trend is there.
Absolutely. And understanding that history, I think, gives us really essential context for the challenges and the opportunities that libraries face right now today.
Why it still matters.
Yeah, it highlights why preserving our collective knowledge is so important and why we need to keep working to make sure information truly is accessible to everyone in our increasingly complex world, digital or otherwise.
Which kind of leads to a final thought for you, our listener. When you consider this amazing long journey of libraries from ancient clay tablets right up to the digital age, what do you think is the most critical role for libraries going forward? What do we need them to be in the future?
It's a great question to ponder.
Definitely something to think about. And hey, if any particular part of this history sparked your interest, maybe ancient Alexandria or the House of Wisdom or the rise of public libraries or the digital challenges, we really encourage you to dive deeper on your own. The story of libraries is vast, and there are so many more fascinating chapters waiting to be explored.